Welcome to the Solemn Vanguard channel. Today we have two game-changing new cards. So, I love these so much. These are so cool. So let me quickly just give you the effects and then we'll talk about all the options that these bring you. We have Thunder Elemental Barry Giron. Auto on V when placed, costs Soul Blast 1, look at 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 2 unit cards without continuous act and auto abilities from among them, put them into your hand and shuffle your deck. So that's already a big plus. But they can't have abilities. Then, act on V if you have 4 or more rear guards without continuous act and auto abilities, cost Counterblast 1, stride a Storm Element Cyclone on your V from face up in your G zone. So this is like a Spear X type of skill, but you need to run a vanilla deck. And then we have Cloud Elemental Moark. Act on V and R once per turn. If you have 4 or more units with no continuous act and auto abilities, cost Counterblast 1, search your deck for up to 1 Thunder Elemental Barry Giron, ride a stand and shuffle your deck. If you rode, turn a Storm Element Cyclone from your G zone face up. This is a lot to process. I know it's a very interesting set of abilities right here. Essentially, the Grade 2 can superior ride the Grade 3 and then flip up a Cyclone. And the Grade 3 can look at 7, add some vanilla units, and then stride Cyclone onto him. What this essentially does is give a superior ride engine to any vanilla deck, and then also give you an instant stride into any vanilla deck. So there's two big things that does. First of all, budget decks. In a budget deck, you could technically pick up a playset of these two along with the Cyclones, which are GRs, so that'll be like the non-budget. But then you can build decks in literally any clan just by buying some common vanillas and throwing them into this little engine, and you can build a deck in that clan with all commons, except for, of course, these double rares, which will be very cheap, and the Cyclone, which will maybe not be very cheap. However, there's something far more important, and that is a new dimension to deck building. I need to preface this by saying, in my opinion, Premium is the only era in Vanguard where Vanguard is starting to be comparable to other card games. There is enough deck building and game choices and options to a point where you can talk about an aggro deck, a control deck, a mid-range, and all these kinds of decks, you know. Back in the day, when Vanguard was very unsophisticated, people used to think, oh, Kagero is a control deck cause it retires. Stuff like that. That's just dumb. People thought, oh, Chaos is a control deck cause it controls the board. It's a floodgate deck, it's a form of control, but there's way more to that. In Vanguard, it's not because you have some retire that you're a control deck, in my opinion. That'd be like saying that, oh, this magic deck, which happens to run Doomblade, is a control deck. That's just asinine. You can't say that. And you can also say, oh, something like Mega Colony or Link Joker is a control deck, but you can't pretend like anything that isn't Chaos or Gredora is not a control deck. A control deck generally needs to be the control in a matchup, meaning being the bigger deck, meaning if the game goes long enough, you win against a deck that is smaller than you, against an aggro deck. So something like DI in Standard, which stalls the game towards a variant's hardleg NLK turn, that is a control deck, because the second they reach that turn, they are almost always gonna win, but they are slower, but they have the highest power ceiling available, because that turn is the most lethal thing the game has at that point. So that is how you should be looking at this. DI and Standard, in my opinion, is like basically the only control deck they have, and everything else is basically a mid-range aggro deck, which is what people basically used to name every Vanguard deck. People used to say, oh, Vanguard you can't compare to Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh or blah blah blah, because it's basically all aggro mid-range decks, and that used to be true to a point, but now that Premium is at this point where there's so many fucking options, we're just beyond that. So having prefaced this, that we are getting into a point where Premium can be compared to other card games, this is comparable to the Highlander cards in Hearthstone. If you know or don't know, in Hearthstone you have these two cards, Zephrys the Great and Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, which can be ran in any deck, and they are extremely good if your deck is built to to work with them. So usually this means your deck runs only single copies of all cards, and then your payoff is the fact that you get to use these two insane cards. These two Cray Elementals are, in my opinion, very comparable to that, because they can be splashed again into any clan. You can run these in any clan, and you get an insane payoff for making most of your deck vanilla. So that is a really, really important one though. It doesn't have to be your entire deck. It just needs to be enough that you can use these cards. A good example would be if you look at Dimension Police, you have the D-Robo Superior Ride. Those decks usually don't run only D-Robos, because there are plenty of good cards that aren't D-Robo that you still want to run. They just run enough that you consistently have them on the turn you need them. I feel like even if you're gonna make, let's say, a vanilla Royal Paladin deck, some Royal Paladins are so good that you might want to run them even though they work against this win con, knowing that you won't be flooded by them and therefore turn off these skills. Now, why did I talk about other card games deck archetypes finally fitting into this game? So the way I see Premium right now, you can legitimately start talking about a control deck, about an aggro deck, about a mid-range deck, about a combo deck. To me, something like an NLK deck is a combo deck. If you look at Modern in MTG, you have strong combo decks, and they don't necessarily have to be slow. They don't necessarily have to be super fast either. I feel like NLK is a combo deck. You do your one combo and your combo wins the game. If you look at Geese is a control deck, because once you reach your win con, you are winning the game, and there is no way around it. Maybe there's like a few cases where, but you know, generally, there is no way around the fact that if the game goes on long enough, Geese wins the game. End of story. So it is the control in a lot of matchups. It's just that it dies to aggro decks if the aggro decks are too fast, because they don't reach their win con, so they can never fully utilize the fact that they are the bigger deck. If you are playing a blue deck in MTG, you are essentially doing a couple things to delay your opponent, which Geese does as well, drawing cards, or Ghidorah Geese stopping your opponent from playing the game until you reach your win con, which always wins. Blue MTG, same shit. Whether you get to a board lock state, or whether you get to a state where your one big beater just runs over it because you've been telling your opponent no with plenty of blue spells, stuff like that, that is what a control deck does. So Geese is like a control deck. And then something like Old Neo is an aggro deck. Now, these two Cray Elementals are essentially a splashable engine to create our version of a very vanilla aggro deck. There have been plenty of times in various card games where aggro decks rely on like 2 cards, and then they just have a lot of other cheap shit, which is essentially what our vanillas are. They are cheap, overstated cards that don't necessarily are super useful because they don't have abilities. They're now made useful because this engine speeds up the deck to a point where their overstatness is helping you out. So whereas last time the introduction of Geese gave Premium, G, an actual legit control deck and not just a floodgate deck, but a real control deck, these now give us a real aggro deck. Now, it could be that this aggro deck sucks, and it could be that this aggro deck is insane, but in general, these facilitate the creation of aggro decks. And so just the fact that we are getting more and more defined, clear archetypes within deck building and Vanguard is a really, really good thing to me. I'm not a fan of just having every deck being mid-range bash phase. Now, there's another reason why this is amazing, and that is they are Cray Elemental. So you can do this for any deck. You suddenly have 2 cards, technically 3, that together form a package that basically says, here's 24 new decks to try and build. Well, even 25 if you want to try Token Ranbu. 3 cards have suddenly opened up 24 new builds. Will they all be good? Of course not. But it's still just 25 new builds out of nowhere being added into the game. New experimentation that can be done just by throwing this into the game. I'm really hoping that as we get more premium collection type products, we keep on getting more Cray Elementals that work this way. They add a lot of deck building opportunity rather than being what they used to be. You know, Cray Elementals back in the day were just, oh, if something is too strong, you can tech these because they kind of counter a playstyle. Like Honolly would counter multi-attack, Bikun would counter multiple Vanguard swings. They kind of existed to make sure that no deck could ever be so unfair that it's unbeatable, because then suddenly you could start teching Cray elementals to stop that from happening in the same way that Bobo could stop people from playing a pure damage deny game. That is good to have, but it's not super interesting. Meanwhile, these just create a bunch of new decks out of nowhere. I really, really like that. Just these 3 cards. You can now try out your 24 new different decks. If anything, it'll probably be more. Like we had this idea where we would just make Highlander Vanilla Bermuda, because you can do that. So many deck ideas are just flowing through me right now just from having these 2 cards. It's very possible that all those decks suck. It's very possible that some of those decks are insane, but it gave us a lot of options. It added even more depth to deck building, and I feel like a solid chunk of the premium collection so far has been doing that. Some cards are a bit bland, but others are just opening up so much space, like the critical triggers that we're getting, like these Cray elementals. Really big fan. So do let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Like this video, very important. Subscribe to this channel, and I will see you soon. Ciao.